For more on this, I'm joined by Jeffrey Ball, scholar in residence from Stanford University. Good to see you, sir, and welcome to the show. Let me start with the question in place that a lot of people are saying this could be the end for Chinese solar panel makers, at least here in the United States. Is that being overstated?
Well, I think it's too early to tell. It's absolutely the case that if these tariffs stand, and we should emphasize that what happened this week in the United States is just a preliminary ruling. But if, in fact, these tariffs stand, it'll absolutely make Chinese-made solar panels more expensive, and Chinese-made solar panels are a large part of the U.S. market like they are the global market. But there are absolutely ways that this might, that Chinese solar panel makers might salvage something here. One is that they might win in some sort of litigation internationally, and the tariffs might not stand. Another is, for instance, that they might find a way to build factories in the United States, and if this happened in the auto industry in the United States historically, and if Chinese solar panel makers end up putting factories in the U.S., then that's a conceivable way that they could do well and get around this ruling.
The Chinese made a deal with Europe. They found a way to compromise. Is it possible there could be compromise here?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's absolutely true that that's a template that the U.S. and China could follow. And your viewers may recall that what happened is that there was a spat, much like your piece just described, between the United States and Europe. And it went to the brink. And at the end, there was very, very high-level negotiation between China and the European Union. And in fact, they came to an agreement. And they came to an agreement that basically limited the amount of exports from China to Europe, and it set a band within which China had to sell its solar panels, so there were price constraints as well. I think it's possible that that can happen, but there are reasons that it happened in Europe that are different from the United States. For one thing, China depended on Europe for a much larger portion of its market for solar panels than China depends on the United States. So China had a much bigger incentive to settle with Europe than is the case in the U.S. The other thing is that there was very, very intense brinkmanship going on between China and the EU, and China threatened in a retaliatory way to impose tariffs on all sorts of European products, including, for instance, wine. And there was therefore a real push among European industry to settle with China. It'll be fascinating to see whether that happens here, but this is a slightly different context.
You brought up an idea that I found fascinating and probably workable, which is having them ship some of the parts here to the United States and having them assembled here for final assembly. Now, would that qualify? Would that be a way to be a compromise, I guess?
Well, you know, one thing to remember in all of this contextually is that the solar industry is globalizing. And so the industry, just like other industries, increasingly does different things in different countries. And what happened with the dispute a couple of years ago, as your piece pointed out, was that there was a tariff imposed by the U.S. on Chinese solar panel makers on cells, which are a component of panels. And what a number of Chinese makers did is they then started making cells in Taiwan and bringing those cells back to mainland China, assembling them into solar panels and sending them to the U.S. That's not terribly difficult because this industry, like others, is globalized. And so, just as I said happened in the auto industry when there was a fight between the United States and Japan 20 years ago, Japanese automakers began building factories in the United States to get around requirements that the U.S. had put on imports of Japanese-made cars. It's entirely possible that that could happen here. Now, there are lots of details that would have to be worked out, but it would be interesting to see if ultimately what happened is an increase in domestic U.S. manufacturing, but manufacturing by companies that are based in China.
You know, there used to be, this is a long time ago, where there used to be substantial subsidies given to homeowners and companies to put up solar panel projects here in the United States, and over the years that's slowly gone away. And I'm just wondering, for the sake of the health of the solar panel industry in the U.S., does it make sense if Chinese manufacturers ultimately leave? I mean, wouldn't that be upsetting, at least I guess, to the installers of these products?
Well, you raise a really interesting point. I mean, there is not one solar panel industry, and there's not one interest in solar energy. So on the one hand, I think what's motivating this push by the U.S. Commerce Department is a desire among some in Washington to increase the manufacturing of solar panels in the United States in the name of basically factory jobs. But that's really only one desire here. So there's a whole other question from a consumer standpoint, that is the people who want to put solar panels on their house or people who buy electricity from a utility that has a solar farm, about what it costs to generate solar power. And theoretically, at least, if one has to pay more for solar panels because of tariffs or anything else, then the price of the power that those panels generate rises. And so there's a fight in the United States, as there is elsewhere in the world, between the interests of people who want to manufacture solar panels within a country on the one hand, and the people who want to pay less money for solar power on the other. And other people have pointed out an interesting irony here, which I think you alluded to, which is that on the one hand, the United States government is incentivizing the production of solar power through taxpayer dollars. And on the other hand, the United States government here is imposing a tariff which at least one would think has the effect of increasing the price of producing solar power. And I think the reason that that's happening is that there are very different interests here. And there's a divergence among policymakers within the United States, just like there's a divergence among people within the solar industry about what one wants here. And that's why you're seeing a kind of messiness.
Jeffrey, you're very nice to say that. I alluded to it, but I do want to thank you for your time. And my final idea before you go, and if any solar panel experts are listening to this, is they should just design windows that are also solar panels as well. And that might solve some of the problems that we have.
That's your $1 million idea. In fact, people are working on that. People are working on it.
All right, we're going to save that for next time. It's good to have you on, Jeffrey. Good to see you. Thank you very much.